I've recently begun reading a lot more about the production of the original trilogy of Star Wars movies, and while there have been a ton of interesting stories, there was one in particular that raised a bunch of questions for me and took a bit more research to dig into. The story of how the practical Sandcrawler model from A New Hope nearly started a war. The story as I initially found it gets told with a few different details, so I'm going to be reading the Wikipedia version of it for today, though there were a ton of versions of it, some of which I'll link in the descriptions if you'd like to check out their particulars yourself. Wikipedia can be edited, and I will probably try to fix it myself after recording this, but as it currently states as of writing this video, while George Lucas was filming on location in Tunisia, the Libyan government became worried about a massive military vehicle parked near the Libyan border. Consequently, the Tunisian government, receiving threats of military mobilization, politely asked Lucas to move his Jawa Sandcrawler further away from the border. The version of the story included on sites like winteriscoming.net and their article, which I'll link in the description as well, goes into how Gaddafi, as the leader of Libya, personally got involved and threatened retaliation if the so-called military buildup within Tunisia was not removed. And this again is an aspect that multiple of the articles that I'll link in the description go into to varying degrees. This all seemed like a really interesting fact, and my little YouTuber brain was really excited to try to cover this, but the problem I ran into here was that I couldn't find any of these pages providing a source for this story. When articles did try to provide a reference, they were just linking back and forth to each other or back to Wikipedia, which doesn't have a citation either, in a not especially complex spiderweb of citation needed. So at no point did any of the pages that I was able to find say where they got their information from. One of the things that stood out really quickly to me while I was trying to research this is that the filming locations for the movie made this seem really questionable. Typically, the filming crew were working out of Nafta and the Nafta Salt Flats, which is on the west side of the country, while the Libyan border is on the eastern one. There were actually two Sandcrawler filming locations in Tunisia that I'm aware of, one of them being in the Nafta Salt Flats, but the second was at the Magar Gorge, which is also within the same region as Nafta, pretty far away from the Libyan border. As I covered in the clip I did on this topic on my Clips channel, which I'll link in the description, what I think this was actually referencing was a similar story related by Roger Christian, one of the set designers, who spoke about how Algerian soldiers across the much closer border with Algeria, quote, saw this name, Star Wars, and they thought we were building a war machine. They had to come over and verify that it was a film set, end quote. J.W. Rinsler goes into the story as well in the book Making of Star Wars, saying, quote, because it was placed on the Tunisia-Algeria border, and because Tunisian military trucks were being used by production, the Algerian government registered official concern about what they perceived as a massive military mobilization on their border. End quote. George Lucas is then quoted as also confirming that version of the story, which is a bit more complex than Christian's, which implies it was just the soldiers rather than official government requests. In my opinion, it's pretty understandable why the Algerian government may think it was an actual military vehicle being built and deployed there, on top of the military trucks helping with the production, the huge tracks, and the fact that it was only built as the lower third for initial filming of A New Hope did make it look a lot like a huge military vehicle, so I'd definitely be scared of it at least. So in a lot of ways, these are similar stories to the Libyan versions, though there are some important differences which we'll talk about in a moment. It still wasn't clear though where the idea that it was ever Libya came from, and I wasn't finding any sourcing on that still either. When I released the clip on how it was Algeria instead, a viewer named Magnus commented letting me know that my research was incorrect and that it was actually Libya based on the Making of Star Wars book as well. They were kind enough to provide a picture of the page that they were referencing, as well as the printing information for the book, so thanks again to Magnus for that. Basically, it turned out that while I had a more recently updated version of the book, at least some earlier editions had seemingly erroneously reported it being Libya instead of Algeria. I was also able to find a similar version of the ebook, which is a bit more of a clear picture to show you here. It seems like this was what the source for the Libyan version of the story was coming from, though the lack of any citations make it difficult to know for sure, especially since some details are still different. The problem we still run into here is the various reports of Gaddafi's involvement, which isn't mentioned at all in even those editions of Making of Star Wars. So I suppose it's an extrapolation on the government involvement that the story mentions, which if that's the case, honestly I wouldn't have thought that held up very well even if it had still been Libya, since it kind of blows the story out of proportion and makes it seem like the threats were far more serious than they appear to have been, rather than just the inquiry. I mean, I get you want to make the story as interesting as you can make it, maybe I'm just boring, but come on. Additionally, several of these stories add to it by suggesting that George Lucas had to move the Sandcrawler to comply with quote-unquote Gaddafi's demands. I did mention earlier that the Sandcrawler was moved to a different filming location and that the second location was further away from the border, but that seems to just be because they needed to film the thing in a different place. None of the official stories I've seen in Making of Star Wars or the other interviews have referenced the moving being done from political pressure. Lucas mentions that Algeria came to inspect the Sandcrawler, as Christian also suggested, but neither of them mentions having to move it. It's possible I've missed something in another source that clarifies all this, in which case please let me know in the comments and I'll make a pinned comment with other clarifications or corrections, but I've not been able to find anything about that so far at least. So it seems like a pretty big extrapolation from different elements of the production story. Either way, that seems to be where everything is coming from as far as I can tell, and I've had a lot of fun with this for some reason, so I hope you've all enjoyed it as well. I've been doing a lot more of this kind of behind-the-scenes production information coverage over on my Clips channel, which I'll link to in the description if you want to check out shorter daily lore and production videos. Though some of those topics that have a bit more to offer, like this one, I'd like to also do in longer form videos here on Datapad where I can go into a bit more depth. If there's something specific you'd like to see me cover on the channel though, let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you next time.